do not hold it against me. But it is not my duty tonight to welcome you to this grandiloquent occasion. That duty falls on the Vice President of Operations of the Caribbean Development Bank, Ms. Monica Labenet.
Thank you, Colin. The Honorable Camille Robinson-Regis, Chairman of the Board of Governors, Premier of Montserrat, Honorable Romeo Donaldson, Mr. Calum Cameron, Distinguished Speaker of the 20th William G. Demas Memorial Lecture, Dr. Norma Demas, wife of the late William G. Demas, Dr. William Warren Smith, President of the Caribbean Development Bank, and Dr. Anne-Marie Irvin, Ministers of Government of the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, Dr. Alvin Hilaire, Governor of the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago, members of the Diplomatic Corps, governors, directors, observers, guests, management of staff of CDB, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, good evening. It is my distinct honor and pleasure to welcome each of you to the 20th William G. Demas Memorial Lecture. In the past 20 years, the Caribbean Development Bank has been hosting these lectures to honor the legacy of William G. Demas. Mr. Demas served as president of the CDB from 1975 to 1987. In addition to being our second president, Mr. Demas is recognized as a preeminent regional economist and visionary who wrote extensively on matters of regional integration and the development challenges of small states. The lecture this year has added significance. It is being held in the birthplace of Mr. Demas and at the Central Bank of the Trinidad and Tobago, where he served as governor from 1988 to 1992. Since its inception, the lecture series has been graced by a long list of distinguished speakers who have shared their knowledge and views on a range of topical development issues affecting our region. We have examined matters such as the impact of climate change on our region, financing tertiary education in the Caribbean, and the social impact of natural disasters. This year, the theme of the CDB's annual meeting is transformation. And in keeping with that theme, our distinguished lecturer, Mr. Calum Cameron, will speak to us tonight on the topic of transforming a digital society, principles and challenges. Drawing on experiences of Estonia, he will explore the challenges and opportunities and lessons of digitalization. Calum is a native of Australia who has lived and worked in both UK and Estonia. He has pursued his passion for entrepreneurship and innovation as a mentor for superheroes, an Estonian entrepreneurship and leadership program for 13 to 17-year-old girls. Where was I? There it was. He was also a mentor for the Founder Institute, the world's largest pre-seed startup accelerator, and Climate CIC, and I quote, which is a European knowledge and innovation community working towards a prosperous, inclusive, climate-resilient society founded on a circular, zero-carbon economy. That came from LinkedIn. He has witnessed firsthand the transformation of Estonia to a digital society over the past 25 years. He has been a key influencer in the development of the Estonian startup ecosystem and has worked closely with many of the companies which now deliver Estonia's digital society. His mission is to build other digital societies around the world with adaptive governments, leveraging the people and solutions that built e-Estonia. I hope you're as excited as I am to hear from Calum. So without further ado, it gives me great pleasure to invite Mr. Calum Cameron to the podium to deliver the 20th William G. Demas Memorial Lecture. Calum?
Thank you very much. And good evening. So my goal this evening is to inspire, if necessary, provoke you into dreaming about, to provoke you into digital dreaming, into ones and zeros, to imagining what your future can be. To do that, actually, let me pull back a moment. What I'd like to do is actually anchor the talk with this simple question, very simple question. What is your vision for your country's digital futures? And what could possibly the CDB nations do together if you combined your resources? You see, this is actually quite an urgent question. 15 to 20 years ago, cross-border data flows hardly existed, right? But now, digital flows account for more GDP growth globally than do traditional or trade in traditional goods. So the future is already now, so you can't wait before you start building and joining in this digital economy or these digital flows that are out there. Because the businesses themselves, the businesses who are generating all of this growth, they can be hosted anywhere. They will go wherever they find the most attractive digital platforms and the most attractive business environments to run from. Actually, I'm going to stand over here a little bit more. I'd love to come out there more. But, the great news is, of course, though, that these guys, these companies, will actually run on the same digital platforms that you create for your own businesses and for your own citizens. They can sit exactly on top of there with almost no additional cost, because all they're doing is just running on the same platform. And countries are already obviously claiming this space. There's a bit of a rush to get in there at the moment. But interestingly, the countries that are running out ahead and achieving most success already, they're agile, they're innovative, and they're small. So the UAE, Singapore, Hong Kong, and Estonia. These are the guys who are going out there and getting the business already. So my question again is, what is your vision? And why can't that be done here? Why can't those same models be picked up here in the Caribbean to take your economies, take your societies ahead of the guys who are already building at the moment? Take their lessons and leapfrog them to take the lead into the digital space. So for most governments, the digital vision tends to be pretty unambitious, pretty abstract even. It's sort of taking what we do now and just putting it online. Sort of the same, but a little bit better using technology. But the potential for digitalization is, the potential for digitalization is not just using technology to, no, I understand the problem. I've got to choose a microphone here, I think. Apologies if that's been breaking your ears along the way. Okay, so the potential for digitalization is not just using the technology to improve your existing processes. It's more about reimagining them using data behind those processes. And it's not just making it easier to interact with service providers, but it's actually about removing the interfaces with the service providers so things just happen. You don't need to force them anymore. And it's not just about making your country more productive, but totally changing of how you think about your state as it becomes borderless in the digital world. So the founders of the most successful startups, they tend to rather first create the vision of what the world is going to look like once they've solved their problem. So having got that vision, they then lay down the basics. They go and find the bits that already exist that they can work with, and then they start experimenting on top of that. So they copy, they learn from the models, and they just start building the new stuff that they want to do on top of that. So if you can think about, or as they experiment their way to the vision, you can think about Elon Musk, SpaceX, and the way that they're now experimenting our way, hopefully. Maybe not for all of us, probably not for me, but hopefully experimenting our way to Mars. And we're talking about resilience. We've only got this one planet at the moment. We need to find somewhere else as well, right? What they don't do is they don't limit themselves to just incremental gains on their existing systems. They change the paradigm. And I think this is what we need to think about when we're talking about digital society. It's not just embedding tech in our existing processes, but rather changing the paradigm and thinking about, well, what does the digital society really, really look like? And to be honest, we don't know. We're working our way there, but we don't know that yet. So to help you dream as we go through this evening, I will talk about the platform. Actually, when I say dream, please keep your eyes open as much as possible. But I'll talk about the platform that powers eEstonia, to tell you what they've done there and to tell you what they've achieved there already and how easy and simple actually that is to copy and build your own environment doing the same thing, or again, jumping ahead of these guys. You shouldn't be limiting yourself just to copying the guys who are out there now. But also highlight some of the challenges that are holding back many other countries, particularly the G20 nations, who are already quite comfortable in their existing spaces. Many of you, of course, you're going to have, your visions, I guess, will be rather pragmatic, looking to solve immediate challenges you've got now. And things like the registration of the refugees here right now. I'm not challenging this at all. But do think ahead. Do think about what you can achieve in the future. And as you're solving problems now, can you actually lay down those building blocks for your digital future? So in particular, thinking about how you can gather and then use your data to surface and solve more complex, more interesting problems, like building greater social resilience, not just environmental, but social resilience. Predicting future demographics, future health issues and cures for them, and most importantly, optimal routes for your flying cars when they come. And finding a way for the government to deliver services to everybody without getting in the way of their day-to-day lives. So this is actually a particular challenge, or I guess a priority in Estonia at the moment. But these guys are seriously hard to please. Estonia already has the world's most digitally integrated society. 99% of their public services are already online, but they're not happy. They want something called a seamless digital society where the government is out of their way. So Estonians believe if they're entitled to something, they shouldn't have to ask for it. It should just deliver it automatically. If you already have the information you know, why are you bothering me? Just give it to me. And likewise, if I have an obligation to you, if I have an obligation to the government, give me the shortest possible route to deliver that. Don't send me off chasing documents or mucking around. When you've already got the information, all I need to do is click this button over here. So like child support benefits. When my daughter was born nearly 10 years ago, the midwife registered her online in the hospital very shortly after she was born, and immediately child support benefits were being paid into my partner's bank account. I guess I should explain, the Estonian population is the same as Trinidad and Tobago, but about 10 times the land size, so it's 1.3 million people there. But for them, babies are national treasures, because the actual Estonian, the ethnic Estonian community is somewhat less, and there's pretty heavy emigration from the country. I think we can all, I guess, feel that. So babies are national treasures, so anything they can do to encourage couples to have more babies, that goes to the top of the national priorities. So this is probably one of the first things that they actually worked out, how to predict that a mother was going to want child support benefits and just get them in there straight away. Don't waste time. But still, people are not satisfied. They want their seamless digital society. They remove unnecessary distractions from my life, right? So, okay. The tax and custom boards, they're very generous. They prepare my tax return for me automatically every year. I just have to log in, sign the return digitally, and click the submit button. That takes me 3 minutes. Every year, 3 minutes I have to waste submitting my tax return. This is not good enough. Estonians, what they want is something, just a one-click, sort of, by the way, tax return, you owe this, you get this, yes, no, boom, done. They just want all of that out of their lives. And this is actually a good thing. I mean, I laugh at them, but it's a good thing because it then pushes their government and pushes their businesses to go that extra yard. But these are first world problems. But it shows that what you can do with a digital society. So do think ahead, start thinking about the problems that you want to solve already, and you can start putting down the platform, you can start gathering the data to make this happen. If I maybe take a liberty here and extend Professor Pelling's theme from last year, that you have an opportunity to do much more than just building back old systems better. You can actually build for the digital paradigm, but you need to have that vision for it. So, what is it? We know the platform, and it's pretty straightforward actually for small agile nations to put this down. But genuinely transforming is genuinely hard for your bigger, more complacent nations. So like Australia, like the UK, like Germany, like the US, even though their leaders recognize it, they're finding it really, really hard to join this society, largely because of cultural challenges. So post-disaster recovery is actually an opportunity for us to leap past these developed nations and build a platform to outplay them in the future. This is what Estonia did. Now, before I move on, a quick disclaimer. As was pointed out earlier on, I am Australian, but I've been connected to Estonia for about 25 years, living there for the last 10 years. I get a little bit unstable when I'm talking about digital society, just because I get so excited by what's been achieved in Estonia, and you can see what's possible. And then I look at Australia and see how hard they're making it for themselves to get in there. And again, it's not the tech. It is purely cultural. There's some cultural decisions that create systemic flaws that are preventing Australia, preventing UK, preventing a lot of these nations jumping forward. So this seriously is a great opportunity for the rest of us to jump out there, because once you're in the digital sphere, size doesn't matter anymore. The borders are gone, so you can actually work with people from all over the world anytime you want to. Now, Estonia's model was built from nothing because there was no model to copy, and they had no money. But they did have some clever people, some very clever people, and they also had an ambition to return to the Scandinavian quality of life that they'd been used to before their last occupation. So they travelled to Sweden. When they achieved independence in the early 90s, they travelled to Sweden, they travelled to Germany, they travelled to Finland and said, yep, this is what we want. This is the life we're going to have. We've just got two problems. We can't afford it, and we actually don't have enough people in the country to build a civil society like that. They didn't give up, and they said, okay, well, nobody's done this before, but how about we just use IT? How about we just use computers and put them in? And do you know what? Because nobody told them they couldn't do it, they put that in place. That already works. And the model itself, it's pretty simple. It gives them home ground advantage in the digital sphere. So when Australia and the others are so busy struggling with their cultural challenges, they can't even field a full 11. While the young ones, the Estonians, the smaller nations, can jump out ahead of them and beat them up. Funnily enough, actually, a colleague of mine, she presented at an e-government conference in Australia earlier this year. And she said that every second presentation referenced Estonia. The advanced nations, or the nations that were advancing quickly, they tended to talk about what they'd copied and learnt from the Estonian model. Australia and another large number of other nations who weren't progressing were explaining why they couldn't copy the Estonian model, how this wouldn't work in their society. And it's true, actually. It is true that there are things here that won't work in other societies, so we have to find ways around them. I'll come to them just now. But either way, there is an Estonian model. It's definitely a thing that people are talking about, so maybe I better tell you about that before it's too late. One last thing before we go into that. Let me tell you about Estonia, for those of you who've never heard of the country before tonight. That work? Yes? No? There'll be a double tap, please, on the slide deck. Yep, thank you very much. So, Estonia, as I said, it's 1.3 million people, up in the icy wastes of Viking Europe. So it's way up in the north there, facing across the Baltic Sea to Finland and Sweden. We've got a large border on the east with Russia and Latvia to the south. So during the Viking times, Estonians made a bit of a nuisance of themselves. So much so that the Swedes actually had to move their capital from the coast to where Stockholm is now, just to get away from these constant Estonian attacks. What goes around comes around. For most of last millennium, Estonia was occupied. So first it was the Danes, then the Poles, the Germans, the Swedes, and then the Russians got in there in the end. So in the end, I think Estonia was independent it was an independent republic for 38 years in the last millennium. The current republic is actually only 28 years old, so it seems very unlikely that the borders there aren't going to be tested again sometime soon. And the last Soviet occupation was pretty much, I think it's fair to say, like a slow-motion hurricane settling on top of the country for 50 years. When Estonia was occupied, they had living standards higher than their Scandinavian neighbours. When they escaped occupation in the early 90s, 50 years later, they were one of the poorest nations in Europe. They had a devastated economy. Their infrastructure was being sold off as scrap metal. But since that re-independence in 1991, Estonia took this bold plan to embark on building the world's first digital nation. And starting from nothing actually turned out to be a great advantage because they didn't have that Victorian plumbing in their government. They didn't have that bureaucratic labyrinth. They could actually start from a blank canvas. One of the most significant decisions they took actually was then they put IT and innovation at the center of rebuilding the nation. And again, this is because to be honest, we can talk about these sort of visionary guys who had this wonderful insight that in the future the world was going to be digital, so let's build that. Now, actually, they had no choice, like I said. They didn't have the people, they didn't have the money. That was all that they could do. So now, 99%, actually back then, sorry, just to close that, back then, only half the population actually even had phone connections. So they really were starting from nothing and trying to build something that didn't exist already. Now, as I said, 99% of the public services are all online. They're available 24/7. That's 600 e-services for citizens, 2,400 or over 2,400 e-services for businesses. 99% of medical prescriptions are digital. 98% of companies are established online. 98% of tax declarations are done online. And as I said, that takes just a few minutes. Over 40% of votes, over 40% of votes in Estonia's recent national elections were done online. They reckon there was a cumulative saving of 11,000 working days in the country, just being able to vote online, people not having to go to do their ballot manually. And then the follow-up European Parliament elections, which was just 2 weeks ago, 47% of Estonian votes, 47% of Estonian votes were done online. That made it for the first time the most popular form of voting in Estonia. This was a tweet from a friend of mine. He said basically in the space of 3 minutes and 20 seconds, well actually no, 2 minutes and 20 seconds, she had downloaded the app and voted in the European Parliament elections. She's based in the US these days actually, so she did it from there. So you see how simple things become. Estonians actually estimate that citizens save an average of 1 week. Each citizen saves an average of 1 week each year, being able to use the digital signing and the e-authentication solutions there. It's around 2% of GDP. But actually, I think it's a bit more than that. So when you think about it, when you reduce the bureaucracy or you remove the drag that bureaucracy creates on society, you then release creativity and playfulness. And people start experimenting and trying new things because it's easy now to do that. And I have a feeling that might contribute to Estonia's leadership in the startup world as well. Something else worth thinking about. So, as well as being small and agile, but with limited resources, the challenge of building a resilient state, despite the threats to its borders, is something that I think Estonia possibly shares with a lot of nations here, whose borders are threatened by climate change and extreme weather events. So their model is worth looking at. Not to build like for like. Tech moves on. but to adopt the principles and the lessons that Estonia has learned along the way. So shall I talk about the platform? Thank you. I like this. How do I go backwards? No, backwards now. Okay, thank you. So, the Estonian digital platform has some simple building blocks, and obviously they didn't know these back in the 90s. They had to experiment to discover them. They had to make all the mistakes that they're actually willing to share now. They're willing to tell everybody else what they screwed up on and what you don't have to do to get to where they are now. And actually, the great thing that I love about a lot of the guys that I get to work with there, they don't want to rebuild what they've done in Estonia. They've got great ideas about the next generation and the next generation, where they can take those. So do think about, okay, they're building blocks now which we can pull down, but actually what can we do beyond what's been proved already? Now, okay, the first element, obviously access. A digital society is pretty pointless if your citizens can't connect into it. But I gather that's not, I might be wrong, but I understand it's not necessarily a massive issue here in the Caribbean, that at least with mobile connectivity, the penetration is very, very high. So this is great. In 1996 in Estonia, they launched a program with the connectivity to start with the schools. So they made sure that all the schools in the country had connectivity before they worried about the rest of the country. But by 2000, they actually determined that internet access was a social right. And so they had it embedded into the universal service requirements for the telcos in Estonia, that they had to provide equivalent quality internet access at an equivalent price for everybody in the country from that time on. I think they negotiated some other stuff out of those universal lists to make space for this one. So now 100% of the country has broadband internet access, so has broadband internet access, has done so for a few years. By next year, that minimum speed is going to be 30 megabits per second, which actually doesn't feel that ambitious, given that most of the country already has a hell of a lot more than that. So if number one is access, number two is data, obviously. Digital society runs on data. I'm not sure how good that looks from out there. It looks bloody horrible from here. But that is actually, that's Estonia's digital society. Those are all the data repositories connected in Estonia that actually underpin the digital society. So all of that then, I'll show you a prettier picture shortly, but all of that then starts with the population register. The population register is the key to your digital society platform. It has the usual stuff about people: life events, births, deaths, marriages, citizenship, ethnicity, address, and so forth. And it becomes the single source of truth in the state for this information. So whenever any agency needs information about a person, this is where they pull it from. They pull it from a discrete repository. It doesn't get copied around at all. And this simplifies functions that depend on having this accurate identity or address details. So like the child benefits from before, like voting online, or like running a census. So if you think about what your plans are for running your next censuses in the regions here. In Australia, and sorry, I'm going to keep picking on Australia because it hurts. But in Australia, our last census was in 2016. There was an option of citizens filling out a web form or filling out the old paper-based form. It costs around US $350 million to run this. And the initial results came out 7 months later. That was a record by about 2 months. Because of the cost and complexity, they only do this every 5 years. Estonia, it's a database query. It takes a few seconds. So they can actually run this anytime they want. They can actually update their information pretty much in real time. This is the sort of thing that it enables once you digitalize everything. The reason, actually, that the census can be done so easily in Estonia is because we have something that you have here, I believe, that, or at least in Trinidad, and I believe or Trinidad and Tobago, and I believe across most of the CDB nations, but doesn't exist in Australia and the likes. You have a national identity, or a national identity number. So in the population register, you have this unique universal number attached to every citizen. That means that you can actually connect their data across all the government agency repositories. It becomes the primary key then for your digital platform. For example, when the roads administration in Estonia want to renew my driver's license, they use that number to pull my address from the population register. I don't need to tell them what my address is. I don't need to give them any documents proving my address. They don't need to go away and then validate all of this information. They trust that that repository has the latest information at all times. This also works for the private sector. So again, we talk, maybe I talk, a lot about digital society from a government perspective. You're actually creating a platform here for the whole of society. The private sector connects in. So if I want to create a new bank account in Estonia, with my permission, they will go and pull that same data from the population registry. The national ID, it's issued at birth in Estonia or when you register as a foreign resident, and it never changes. I think saying this is pretty obvious to most of you guys, but again, in a lot of countries, this is actually a major issue. In Australia, we've tried to burn governments who thought about bringing in a national identity. It's too Orwellian for us to have this. Some countries have actually issued a national identity, but for some reason it changes every time you renew your national identity card. That means they need yet another number on top of that that then connects up the data from across their history in the systems there. So then we have access, data, and within the data you start with the population registry. But then data needs to flow between all the registries. It needs to flow securely and reliably so you can actually start delivering services automatically without asking citizens to provide the information again and again and again out there. Oh, it also means that you can anticipate the needs and automate the service delivery based on life events. So things like giving birth. Going back to the child support benefits idea. In Estonia, when a mother gives birth, the Ministry of Social Affairs remember, babies, national treasure, the ministry knows they're going to be paying these child support benefits. So when the midwife registers the birth of the child online in the population registry from the hospital, literally within hours of the baby being born, child benefits already start flowing. And the way this works is when she registers it, it triggers an event in the Ministry of Social Affairs system. Ministry of Social Affairs system then goes and checks with the Tax and Customs Board to find out what was the mother's salary, what was her salary, and what's the tax that she's paid. Based on that, they're able to calculate what the child support benefits should be and automatically start paying them into her bank account. Simple as that. So their thinking is, again, this is pretty obvious when you talk with them, their thinking is, why waste time asking questions if you already know the answers, right? And the government generally knows the answers, they're just not sharing it with one another. Let me compare this with Australia. So in Australia, they've also digitalized this process, but there's no national ID. So there's no connectivity between the different agencies to share this information. So after the mother has given birth, either of the couple will need to go online to the Department of Human Services website and apply for child support benefits. The way they do that is they load up a questionnaire and they complete the answers that obviously the government already knows. They then submit documents to the government that the government provided them in the first place. They then submit some more documents to prove their identity, and these documents would generally have come from the government in the first place. Having done that, they then get the documents that were provided by the hospital to prove that the child was born. So now register the child, all going well. After the documents and so forth have been validated in the background by somebody, they'll start getting the child support benefits within 2 weeks. That's all going well. Again, why waste time asking questions when you already know the answers that are out there? Now, of course, if they're allowed to, even in Estonia, agencies will build data silos because there's a belief that if I have a business process and I want to make sure my workflow works reliably, I need to have all that data under my control. So the way you got to get around this, what that means is that the government is, what that means is that governments where they don't have single sources of truth for everything, they're actually managing loads of copies of stale data Because when I go to update my address because I want something like I want to renew my driver's license, I will just tell the roads authority, here's my new address. They're not telling anybody else. I'm not telling anybody else. So now you've got these IT guys, these expensive IT guys, who are working diligently to maintain their high-quality data, which is stale. It's already gone. So what they do in Estonia is they apply something called the once-only principle. I think you can pretty much guess what that means. The state may only ask for information from me once. Once any agency in the state has that information, they must share it with other agencies as needed, with my permission, but as needed. They're not allowed to come and ask me again for that same bit of information. And also, agencies are not allowed to create duplicate databases or repositories of information that already exists out there. What this does is it means that when the roads authority wants my address, they have to go to the population register. They've got no choice because they're not allowed to ask me. They can ask me whether this address they've got from the population register is current. And if I say it's not now updated, it will be updated in the population register. So what you get out of that is you start getting high-quality data because the data is being maintained in one place by all the different agencies and by me. It means the data lifecycle is obviously much cheaper because, or less costly at least, because you don't have all these copies of stale data around. And bizarrely, the data becomes more secure as well because there are fewer copies of it to protect, right? So in 2007, I don't know how many people know this, other than the ones that I've been talking to the last couple of days, but in 2007, Estonia was sustained what was probably the world's first state-backed cyber attack. One of our friendly neighbors decided to launch what's now quite a primitive attack, but back then it was relatively significant against the Estonian systems. So they tried to, or they did, flood the government websites, some banks, some media portals with data to try and knock them offline. This was actually only a few weeks after Estonia and the world's first national elections where genuine iVoting or internet voting was available. So I guess you might even think of it as more of a sort of a symbolic attack to say, look how vulnerable you guys are. It sort of backfired because what it did is there was a minor disruption, wasn't a big issue, but the Estonian IT guys got this loads of valuable data about how to build a robust cyber platform, a robust digital platform. And the thing that they learned from that, and I don't know how much they thought about that beforehand, they'll obviously tell you that this was all by design. But I think what they learned from that was actually having that data distributed meant that it was much harder to attack because you now need to take the system offline. You now need to compromise so many different databases running on different technologies with different vulnerabilities that you're not going to have time to get into them all before they're all shut down or you're shut out of the system anyway. So this is a major learning. Rumour has it, actually, we learnt a bit about our friendly neighbours' internal systems as well as part of that attack. Okay, so to share the data and to share the data securely between these disparate agencies and businesses, there are businesses plugged into this system as well. Estonia developed something called X-Road. See, that's a pretty picture. Can you go back a few to the ugly picture? Keep going, keep going. That one. Remember, that's the reality. Go back, go back, go back. This is the pretty picture. So don't be confused thinking there's one big cable that runs down the middle of Estonia and we've just plugged everybody into that. These connections are actually between the different repositories, or between the different agencies and businesses who are participating. These are direct connections between the different repositories. What they've got is security servers that encrypt the connections and make it all secure, make it easy, and direct contracts between those agencies around service level agreements and so forth. This is easier to understand and sell, though, to talk about it this way. So this X-Road is actually the backbone of the Estonian digital society. This is what actually gets all the data flowing and gives everybody confidence that it's safe to actually use the platform. So much so this platform has now been rolled out in Finland, it's being rolled out in the Middle East, it's being rolled out in Central Asia as well. And actually, I'll come to that later, it's the good thing about this, and actually I think a clever thing from the Estonian side, is when they built this, they immediately open sourced the code. So if you want to take this, grab it. It's sitting up there in GitHub. For those who know what GitHub is, pull down the code, deploy it, you've got your own digital society. Really easy. But actually, there is support for it. There's a group called the Nordic Institute for Interoperability Solutions. These guys can actually provide advice on how to deploy this, and obviously there are a number of companies out there, Estonian and otherwise, who can help with that. So, access, data. The third thing is digital identity. By connecting data from the different agencies and the businesses, you start to unlock all these new services, both from the government and from outside as well. But for a lot of these services, particularly ones with sensitive data, like medical data, health data, you really need to know who's behind the device, who's on the phone here, getting into there. Not who has access to the email address, because that's easy enough to hack into these days. Not who has access to just opening up the device, but who can prove on the device that they are the person they're saying they are. So having a trusted digital identity or electronic ID is really, really significant to make this happen. Now, just to be clear, actually, this is not the same as a social security number in the US. So this is not secret information. Agree with that? There's mine. I know you can read it really well from here, but I'm sure it's being live streamed out there around the world. But actually, the number on there, from what I understand, it's very similar to here in Trinidad and Tobago. So you can find out by looking at that number that I'm male. I was born in the last century, actually the last millennium. It's actually got my birth date as well. It tells you that I am the third man born on that date registered in the Estonian systems. I didn't get to first. I wasn't fast enough. And there's a control number as well. But the point there being is that number is actually just my digital name. It's as secret as Calum Cameron. They're the same thing, really. That's just my presence in the digital world. But combine that with quality electronic authentication and electronic signing software, now you actually unlock the digital society. Now you actually unlock all the opportunities out there. So with that, I can log into government services from anywhere in the world. I can create a business in Estonia from anywhere in the world. Electronic voting becomes possible. I can log into my bank and I can confirm significant transactions from there. I can access, with that same thing, I can access my daughter's school platform and her systems in there. I can sign business contracts. So pretty much everything is possible once you have that electronic identity. And that what's significant here is not just that it's strong, but it's actually trusted by everybody else out there as well. So think about health sector again. You can manage sharing your medical data because the government believes they know, and the companies who then build on top of it believe they know who is behind the device. So they can actually share this information because it's yours anyway. You've actually told them who you are. You own that information. It means I can get my prescriptions digitally. It means I don't have to travel to the GP before heading to the pharmacy. Now, an interesting thing, for countries that can't or won't have a national identity, they'll try to do this in the private sector instead. They'll go out to the private sector and say, well, you guys build this digital identity thing because, hey, government, private partnerships, you guys know what you want, you just go and build it and we'll support you. This can work, but there are limitations here because the digital identity those guys are going to present is not necessarily got the level of assurance that they've actually verified who the person really is that's come up to be, that's actually got that identity. It's not the same as walking up to a respected or trusted government authority. There are some out there actually within the agencies. You actually walk up and say, yes, we've seen this individual, this really is Calum Cameron, or this really is his daughter because The midwife registered her as soon as she was born. So then what that means is there are certain services that you can't do. There are certain things you can't do. So for example, would you share your medical data online with somebody claiming to be your cardiologist who's only authenticated using their Gmail account? You actually, we know that's not necessarily, there's no link between those digital identities and the real people. The UK has actually tried to do this because the UK doesn't have a national ID, so the government has gone out and actually partnered with the private sector to build something called UK Gov Verify. Now, it's a very cool attempt, but again, the problem is that the government is not saying that they know who these people are. So it means there's a limit to what they can do with that digital identity. Actually, in India, we're actually building a private digital identity solution as well. Because unfortunately in India, the Supreme Court has decided that the private sector may not authenticate people against the national identity scheme, Aadhaar. What this means though is we have to go and build something alongside it. So there are now 2 digital identity schemes in India. But as much as possible, we still get the people to register using their Aadhaar card, so that there's still some sort of verification. But again, we're limited as to how much we can do with the data and the services that we can provide there, because we don't have that full chain going back to the government saying, yes, this really is the person who they say they are. So, what did we get to? We did access, data, identity. So the digital identity that manifests you inside the digital space. There is one final ingredient. This is the easiest one of all. Trust. And this is where so many countries are running into problems. Now trust is obviously, it's built out from the digital identity, the e-signature solutions, and then it comes along with the legislations and the principles that actually drive the platform and bring people in there. So in Estonia, it commits any stakeholders in the data interoperability solution to be absolutely transparent and accountable for any access to that data. Without that trust in place, I don't think many of us are actually going to allow our data to be shared through the system. And this is the problem in Australia and UK and so forth. There's just no trust in the governments to let them do that sort of thing. So in Estonia, citizens do control their data. So again, can you actually read that from down there? Or shall I just talk you through it? I'll talk you through it anyway. This here is something called My Data Tracker. It's a government tool provided to us, and what you're seeing there is access to my data in the Estonian systems. I just did a screen print of that recently. As you can see over the right-hand side here, these are the actual access, and the information is highly encrypted. Or it's in Estonian. I'm not sure which. But actually, what this is really, actually, there was actually a joke during, I think, World War II about using Estonian as encryption because nobody else is going to understand it either way. They didn't have Google Translate back then. What you're actually seeing there, all those accesses to different bits of information from the population registry, my details in the population registry, all of those are actually the state websites pulling up information that I asked them to pull up to show me what they've got. But they're still logging that and making that visible to me that those state information systems have gone and got that data on my behalf. So if you think about then with medical data, my daughter spends a lot of time with her grandmother out on Estonia's largest island called Saaremaa. It's actually, Saaremaa is where those pesky Vikings came from. And I was actually talking with somebody recently about this, and she explained to me, no, they weren't nasty guys. They were actually just defending because apparently the Swedes hit them first. Don't know, but maybe we get to occupy Sweden next. That could be fun. Anyway, so my daughter spends a lot of time out there with her grandmother on Saaremaa, and she loves climbing in the apple trees, and it's going to happen. She's going to break her arm at some point. She's going to come out of there. She'll obviously get treated in the local hospital first, but any of the x-rays, any of the doctor's notes will be immediately uploaded to the e-health system. So when she comes back to Tallinn, where we live, and we get to see her GP there, her GP will already have that information. Her GP can look that up straight away. and we will see that her GP has looked at that information. Now, if anybody else in the clinic or the hospital or the ministry or any of the other authorized systems that are connected to the data platform, if any of them look inside at that information and they can't satisfy us or the courts that they had good cause to be looking at the information, they get locked up for 3 years. Simple as that. It doesn't matter how special these guys are. It doesn't matter if they are the top cardiologist in Estonia or something like this. If they cannot prove that they're in there with good cause, and that we accept that, they will get locked up. So this is why Estonians trust their system. It's because not only do they have control over their data, not only is it transparent who's getting in there, but the costs of breaching that trust are pretty damn high. So people just don't do it. Okay, quickly, a few other principles and acts that went in to make this happen. There's the Identity Document Act. Again, I don't think this is a big thing here because it's pretty common out here. But in Estonia, it's mandatory to have an identity document once you're, I think from when you're 15 years old and beyond. Actually, most kids have them anyway because it makes it easier for getting bus services and stuff like this. That card, oh, that's not clever. See, I'm an engineer. That card that I was showing before, you see there, I'm sure everybody can see that really easily. That actually contains my digital identity as well. So it's got my private key and the digital certificates on there, and I can unlock those when I go online. I plug this inside of my laptop, and I can unlock those with one PIN code will actually allow me to authenticate, another PIN code will allow me to digitally sign agreements. But actually, I don't use that so much these days. Do I still have my phone? Okay, yes. So I use it mainly on my phone these days because the SIM inside my phone also has those certificates and private key. And I unlock them with different PIN codes. But now there's also an app on there that it actually splits them. It splits the keys and certificates in half, and part of it's on here, part of it's on a server. And what it means, though, is I can, again, just use that app. I don't need the SIM anymore. I don't need to carry the card anymore to present my digital identity online. It makes life really, really easy. Oh, actually, worth pointing out, this card, was actually copied from Finland. The difference is we learned from Finland, or Estonia learned from Finland, who didn't make it mandatory, and so didn't have the traction to actually build services around it. In Estonia, they made it mandatory, and then obviously put the digital ID on there as well. In Estonia, that was developed by the government. The mobile ID solution based on the SIM was developed by a grouping of the telcos and the banks who put together a private entity to build that. And the app version was actually then just two private companies who came up with that. So it doesn't need to be the government who does all this. The government just needs to provide the platform and the cornerstones of it, just to build that trust that's out there. Okay, so Identity Document Act, I've talked about the once only principle, which means that the government can only ask for data once, otherwise they get in big trouble. What that does is, as well as improving the quality of the data and making it possible to automate and to predict and to actually put out the services, it builds confidence within the society as well. Because if things are just happening, your trust levels go up. But if the friction's in there, if things are breaking and so forth, because there's poor quality data, then trust goes down. Guess what's happening in Australia? The other thing that they've done is they've harmonized the authentication and the trust service standards with the rest of the EU. So the EU has something called EIDAS, which is the Electronic Identity and Trust Services Regulation. What it means is that in any country, if you're signing on a qualified authentication, or actually a qualified signing device, which is basically my phone and that app, it means that that signature is legally enforceable all across the EU. So again, something that might be useful here is you build your own solutions to make sure you've got common standards and even perhaps base it off what's happening in the EU or elsewhere, so that anything you do is actually portable across borders. So then, as I said, it's easy. Access, data, identity, trust. And there's your platform. But it has to be resilient, obviously. So, as I mentioned earlier, Estonia developed the pretty high expertise in cybersecurity, following some suggestions from our neighbour. Actually, NATO then, it actually worked so much in Estonia's benefit because then NATO put their cyber centre of excellence in Estonia. So now it's just paying back time and time again with all the experts from around the world coming into Estonia to build out the capabilities there. But and cyber attacks are a reality, of course. If you've got these digital solutions, you do need to develop the capabilities to defend them. But that's just part of life these days. That is digital society. But what if you get hit by an extreme weather event? Or what if your country gets invaded? Do you know what? It's actually pretty easy. You just run your government in the cloud and then restart it in another location. And boom, you're still going. Because, of course, as we said before, digital is portable. So you don't have to run it in your own local physical data center. 2 years ago, Estonia opened up this data embassy in Luxembourg. They actually had the Vienna Conventions extended to take into account data now. So there's a secure rack in a data center in Luxembourg that's known as Estonia, which means that the Estonian government is now able to put national data outside their territory. And quite literally, they can fail over the government services and the public services to Luxembourg and run them from there if they ever need to, for whatever reason, get out of the country itself. But again, think about it. I think it's very relevant here as well, where we don't know what the future is going to hold, other than we do know there's going to be lots of tests, the resilience of our society's resilience of the local services. So if you can come up with bilateral agreements with trusted locations that are probably not exposed to the same hurricane that you're going to be exposed to, so a bit further away perhaps, then I think it's really worth doing. Put your data in the cloud. Estonia has actually done a lot of the research, had a lot of the shouting matches about whether government data should go into the cloud or not. The answer is, yeah, it should. It's entirely doable. So put it into the cloud and then make sure that you can run that from other countries if you need to do so. So I'll spin along here a little bit. Next phase, had to get it in there, artificial intelligence. It's now that they've actually got this pot of data, they want to start taking advantage of that to start, let's say, answering more difficult questions, like how they're going to increase employment in the future when you've got the rise of artificial intelligence. There's conflict of interest there, isn't there, with artificial intelligence answering that question. Can you identify future disease hotspots? Or can you develop new national business models based on your existing resources? So can you have algorithms that will actually pull that information out to you and actually give you at least some experiments that you can run? Or could you actually optimize education or immigration based on future business models that you want to develop for the nation? But a challenge here with artificial intelligence and machine learning for small countries like Estonia, and sorry, most of the countries here, is that our populations are too small. We don't produce enough data. And machine learning needs a lot of data to do anything useful. So this is just my idea. I haven't spoken with anybody who actually knows what they're talking about this. But I'm wondering, for example, in Estonia, as we said, Finland has already deployed X-Road there. So they've got the interoperability platform, and we've connected our interoperability platforms. Finland is also the only neighbour in the region who is ethnically connected to Estonia, and neither of them would admit it, but they're culturally very similar as well. So maybe by combining their data with the Estonian data, we can actually reach that critical mass. Likewise here, perhaps it's not so simple just grabbing data from everywhere and hoping to learn something out of it, because you've got to have sufficient commonality to get anything useful there. But maybe there are things that you can connect by pooling data from across the countries to develop that critical mass. You can actually use artificial intelligence here. Okay. And now the part that I get excited by. Now you've got your digital platform. Your citizens are all connected. They're served efficiently, and that friction of day-to-day life is just gradually fading away and becoming a dream. You're moving into this seamless digital society. And the interactions with the government, this isn't just interactions with government, this is interactions with businesses, banks and so forth as well, because they're all built on top of the same platform. Now you can start 80% of the global revenue for the music industry came from CD sales. Music streaming wasn't yet a thing. Last year, music streaming accounted for nearly 60% of global revenues because Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Music, YouTube, they're borderless. They can serve anyone, anywhere, all the time. In the meantime, between 2006 and last year, last year was when the revenues for the global music industry actually recovered to almost the 2006 levels. Because in between, they crashed. They totally dived because they didn't have a business model for the new digital paradigm. So what they did is they tried to port the old business models over. You remember, we could pay for and download digital albums and digital singles. But then why do that when you can just get them easily from Napster or from Kazaa or these sort of guys? So the revenues absolutely plummeted. Now they've worked it out. You stream music as a service. You make it really easy for people to listen, to experiment at a predictable low cost. And now the industry is growing rapidly again. So in the US, streaming is now 75% of the market. Physical is only 10% of the market. Now, I don't want to offend any audiophiles out here because the quality isn't the same, but it's a reality that this is how music is being consumed mainly these days. Can governments copy this model? Can you provide government as a service or government platform as a service to anybody else in the world on call? Again, on digital books. In the last 5 years, digital book sales have doubled their share and now pass more than 25% of the global market. Amazon can sell their ebooks to customers anywhere, whenever they want to buy. And the bizarre thing here is, this I do find bizarre, is we don't own the books once we've bought them. So as soon as we close our Amazon account, that's all gone. We've lost those. If we die, we can't hand them over to our children or to our partners. But the bizarre thing is, we still go and buy them, and often, at least I'm finding now, that the digital edition is more expensive than the physical copy, even though they don't have the printing costs, they don't have the distribution costs. But I will still pay more for the digital copy just for that convenience of being able to get it now, straight onto my tablet. So consumers around the world are now ready to buy their services from anywhere and even pay extra for the convenience of doing that. And businesses are ready to serve them from anywhere, anytime. Shouldn't government start joining in? So, welcome to e-residency. In 2014, this was Estonia's first big experiment with new business models for the state based on their digital platform. Remember again, Estonia's population, 1.3 million, few problems actually building, sustaining a state, the sort of state they want, like the Scandinavians, like the Germans and so forth. So their question was, to generate more revenue, we need more people. How do we get more people? How do we get more people quickly who'll start paying us tax? So the challenge was put out there. How do we 10x the Estonian population as quickly as possible? They just removed the borders. And they invited everybody in the world to come and become an Estonian, virtually. So become an e-resident. And of course, being an e-resident, it gives you no rights to actually come to Estonia. It gives you no rights to actually set foot in the country. But what you can do is take full advantage of Estonia's e-services and their digital platform. So you can create and run a business in the EU without ever entering Estonia or the EU or having the rights to do so. It costs Estonia nothing because they're using existing systems. All they're doing is just putting more data on the same systems out there. But it does generate revenue for the state. This is the other interesting thing to work out firstly, whether they could do this, and then secondly, whether it would generate any revenue. And it's already generating more revenue than a number of sort of traditional services from the government. Note that the individual's tax residency doesn't change here. Their tax residency is still wherever they're based and wherever they normally pay taxes. What Estonia accrues are any corporate taxes that would be paid, and they've got a pretty friendly corporate tax policy in Estonia that you only pay corporate taxes if you distribute the profits. But also it's generating a lot of business for service providers in Estonia. So generating more employment and generating taxes coming out of that. So this was their first big experiment. And where do you think this platform was most popular? And we assumed India, Singapore, not Singapore, China, maybe Russia, maybe the US, maybe countries where the entrepreneurs wanted to build EU businesses. I had the convenience of running an EU business. Actually, other than the Finns, who actually own a lot of Estonian property, so it's very convenient for them to be able to run on our systems, probably the country it's most popular with are Germans. I mean, Germans who can just run their EU business from home, register it in Germany, they're finding it cheaper and easier to actually launch their business on the Estonian e-residency platform or the Estonian digital platform and then continue running their business from home like they normally would, rather than running it in Germany, where it's actually far more hassle, there's far more bureaucracy, and it is far more expensive. So now I reckon there's, I think the numbers are there are about 60,000 e-residents with about 6,000 businesses. Not massive for 4 years of growth, but not bad considering this was a radically new idea when it was done. And people seem to be getting the idea now. Last year, the numbers doubled. An extra 25,000 people came onto the platform last year. That's almost twice the number of births in Estonia last year. And those babies, they ain't going to be paying taxes for a while yet. These guys are going to be bringing revenue into the country. So I think this is the future for states. This is our future to compete, to provide services to people anywhere in the world, anytime they want them. Because again, digitalization, it removes the constraints of physical boundaries. Now, the other thing that was actually quite exciting about e-residency is the courage of the Estonian government to do this. From the time they decided in a competition that they were going to do this, or immediately, the president of the country and the prime minister of the country jumped up and shouted out to the international community, guess what? In 6 months, we're going to have an e-residency platform. Customs and border officials, the police officials, what? They had no clue how to do this. They seriously had no clue how to do this. So it was done really proper startup style. And certainly 6 months later, when they launched, it was pretty rough. To become a virtual resident of Estonia, you had to visit the country twice. First time was to go and apply to join the platform, and the second time was to come back a few months later to pick up your card. Nowadays, it's way easier. Nowadays, you can just go into your local Estonian embassy or representative and do everything there locally. You don't ever have to go to Estonia. And for people who can't go to Estonia for whatever reason, they can still become an Estonian e-resident. Now it just works, yeah. But until other nations develop this ability and this willingness to experiment, I'm going to struggle to actually compete for the future. So again, you see what I'm getting to here, that smaller countries, agile nations who are prepared to actually take a bit of a risk can actually jump out way ahead and actually work out these business models before the bigger nations get in there. Because they're big, they're heavy, they're slow, they've got their cultural challenges, which are going to prevent them getting in there anytime soon. I think the last thing I'd just remind you of is back in the, I don't know, most of you might not remember that far back, but in the mid to late 90s, there were two big giants who controlled the web, AOL and Yahoo. And then came along two smart guys with an algorithm. And now Google runs that space entirely. Why can't we do the same here? So maybe post-disaster development and the planning for managing risks in the future can actually become a competitive advantage, the way that it was for Estonia when they came out with nothing and then leapt ahead purely out of necessity. So do dream of your digital future. Think about the basics. Copy what you can from others that have already done it, so you don't waste time. Learn from their mistakes and jump ahead of them. Start experimenting, knowing that you've got the advantage of agility and speed that comes with being smaller. So, that's my question. What is your vision for your digital future? Thank you very much. Good. Sure.
An ability and a willingness to experiment. With those words, the gauntlet has been thrown down. And in spite of having said a few times during his presentation, why waste time asking questions, we would like you to ask some questions now, and Calum would answer them to the best of his ability. There are microphones in the aisles. Just indicate and walk to the microphone. We have our first question.
Hello, my name is Floris. Thank you very much for an interesting presentation. I've got two questions, actually. When you take a country like Australia, what is your advice, or how would you deal with those cultural issues that you mentioned? And secondly, just really out of curiosity, what's happening in Estonia when it comes to blockchain technology? Thanks very much.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so advice for Australia, and as much as I'm qualified to give it, because as I say, there are very clever people working on this there. But it's the same advice, actually, that I'd give to any startup or any company out there as well. Find a niche. Find a niche area that some people really care about, and actually prove to them that this is safe. Prove to them that you can actually have a digital identity or a national identity in Australia, and it creates enough value for them to want to have that. The alternative way to do that, if you can't take that leadership, wait until a disaster comes and then take that opportunity to whack everything in. On blockchain, so Estonia's actually had blockchain in the system for about 10 years now. Before it became popular, Estonia was already using this for their e-health platform and the likes. There are companies in Estonia, actually the company who developed a lot of this, a group called Guardtime, also provide their blockchain services to NATO, to the US DoD, and these sort of guys. Estonia's at a stage now where they don't really talk about blockchain anymore. It'll come in as a technology if they need it for whatever their solution is, but they do see it genuinely as just, it's another technology. It's not something that from the business leader, the government side and so forth, you need to worry about. Again, just trust your engineers. Tell them what you need, and if they tell you, do you know what? A small Excel spreadsheet is going to do that just as well as blockchain, then trust them. Go for that.
Yeah, I have to jump in. My battery is low, and I have my speaking points on my mobile. Thank you for the presentation. My name is Johanna Brüggemann. I'm from Germany, half Swedish, so my kids have an ID without having a passport yet. I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit more about India, because I've heard about India's ID programs, and I was just a little bit taken aback that you're saying you're building a parallel system. Why? And then you said once regulation. And
once only, yeah.
I think you talked about regulation and laws that have to be in place to do all of this, a lot actually, and maybe you want to tell us a little bit more. And then if you have to pay more online to get the product delivered, and with less people involved to get the product to you, like the book, something like a concentration of profit seems to take place.
For sure.
And I wonder if you want to touch on that issue. Thank you.
Okay, sure, thank you. So just to make sure I get all of these, let's start with Aadhaar in India. So what happened there was, initially it was meant for everybody. So it was quite actually amazing achievement on the Indian side. I think in the space of 5 to 6 years, they were able to register over 1 billion people into their Aadhaar system. And that is phenomenal to get all of them digitized and actually to give them that digital identity. And actually for a lot of them, it would have been their first national identity to give them access to all the different services and so forth out there. But then there was a challenge somewhere along the way with businesses accessing it for privacy reasons. Now, I don't know fully whether this was a design issue, that too much information was perhaps being shared from the Aadhaar system when a business authenticated somebody there. But then the Supreme Court decided, no, businesses have to be kept out of there. As a result, it means that businesses don't have this digital identity solution, and so they need to develop something in parallel to it. It is a shame, but this is the challenge we're going to have in a lot of countries. I think we were talking about it actually yesterday, that there's a backlash now in California against some of the new tech as well. We're going to see that coming through, and we need to work this out. There's a lot of new stuff happening. Some stuff's going to go wrong. We'll work it out over time. We don't know what it is yet, though. So then, yeah, that was the frustration with Aadhaar. I think actually, just as I do think about that now, I believe, I hope at least, in India that what's going to happen is this private solution will ultimately be connected with the government solution, but that there'll be sufficient protections in place to make sure that people are aware of what data is being shared and actually being able to control that. Maybe that's the future there. Certainly in Sweden, the Swedish government was too slow, and so the banks got together and they created something called BankLink. And it was actually very successful, and we used it in Estonia as well for a while. I believe actually the initial EID or e-identity, e-tax platform, which preceded the e-identity in Estonia, so it was actually available beforehand. I have a belief that you could use your BankLink to enter that already. But now the Swedish government has taken over BankLink and adopted it as their own. What was the second one?
Regulation.
Regulation.
Laws, maybe.
Well, so once only was the main thing I was talking about there. There are a few other things in there as well, but once only was the key one that actually forced agencies to start sharing because they won't of their own volition. For them, it's much easier just to say, give me the data and I'll do it. But that prevents any of the automation. Not having that connectivity prevents automation and prevents trust in the data that's there. So the idea was put in once only. You cannot take data if it's already in the system. And there's actually, just to be clear, there's a central catalogue where all the different agencies publish the data sets that are available from there, that they own, or that they're responsible for, rather. Owns the wrong term, because people still own their data. So any data sets that they're responsible for are then published in this catalogue. And if I'm a developer in one agency and I've been told, build this, I'll go to the catalogue and find out who's got the data that I need, and then we'll sort out the contracts with them to get that data. Likewise, actually, if I want to develop a new repository, I need to get that approved to make sure that I'm not duplicating data from somewhere else.
Yes, but you need laws to have, for example, a requirement to report where you're living and that you are relocating, and you need laws governing the tax. And yeah, that was actually...
Actually, no. I don't know. I don't know if there are laws saying that I have to update the government when I change my address. In Germany, sure, okay. But then again, that sort of makes sense if there are services that you receive from the government that depend on that address. You're going to do that anyway, aren't you? But the point is, you should only have to do it in one place. You shouldn't have to go to multiple agencies to tell them all that's being updated, yeah. And then there was something else.
Yeah, that is more on the global issue of profit and...
For sure, yeah. Well, I think that the thing that, yeah, it's a separate challenge, isn't it? That we need to, maybe we can chuck artificial intelligence to that one as well. It's a big challenge that we need to work out as to how to change our social models to go with this as well. Yeah? But the reality is that people are paying more for digital services than they would have for the physical services, just because it's so much more convenient, and they can get it from anywhere. Cool. Thank you.
Fascinating. Thank you very much. My name is Raul Herrera. Two queries, and it's really very thought-provoking. One was the issue of labor disruption, and the other is the issue of security. A number of intelligence chiefs, cabinet ministers, and a number of governments are saying that the biggest threat today, there are a number, climate, but the issue of electoral security is paramount. On the first issue, we see the combination of digitalization with AI, and in the States, for instance, the two major employment sectors are cashiers and drivers. With automation, you can now board with visual or thumb, digitization. And they're talking now about, looking at perhaps a living wage type arrangement, because you're looking at dislocating hundreds of thousands of people, if not more, 20, 30% of a population. Terrific future, digital future, but what do you do with the labor disruptive factor when you have all this, internet road, and now you've displaced? Governments still have to deal with.
That's the purpose of governments. Yeah.
And the second is just a security issue. So you've got this concentration in this population registry. We've seen what's happened in, at least I'm in Washington, D.C., 2016 election. We're concerned about what happened in 2018 and now 2020, and we're seeing it in a number of other countries around the world. Does it become do you become more vulnerable with that level of concentration of information? And, how do you ring fence it so that you don't, we are concerned about, taking over an airplane that's flying and having it, they're talking about pilotless planes.
For sure, for sure.
But when you have a security breach, so I'd love to hear your thoughts on those 2 points.
No, sure, thank you.
Thank you.
So when it comes to the social impacts and obviously the disruption of the workforce, let's be honest, we don't know the answer yet. This is actually one of the massive challenges for society going forward, is to how we're going to engage people in the future. How we're actually going to adapt from this model of a certain amount of currency per hour of your time to a totally different society. We don't know yet. And that's a reality. I think the best minds are on it. We don't know yet. But the thing that we have to remember is we're talking about digital society here. This is happening already. It's not that we have a choice right now whether we're going to move to a digital society or not. What we're actually talking about is whether the government's going to actually anchor that and provide the platform and actually take advantage of it as well. It's a really important, massive question. I'm not going to pretend to be qualified to answer that one. When it comes to the security side, though, so I think there are 2 levels here. One is about the individual's privacy, and the other thing's about the sort of the state level or societal level impact that can be hit there. Now, if you think about the individual privacy, what is more? One point of clarity. Can we go back a few slides again, please, to that really ugly one? I just want to make a quick point here because this is quite important. Yep, back to the really ugly one. Boom, thank you. The data is not centralized. Those are all the different data repositories in Estonia, and it's just a small country. So my point there was actually, the data's not all in one place, so it's not a single honeypot target for these to come into. Well, the point is, if you want to get all the data about me from Estonia, then you need to hack into a hell of a lot of databases, all using different technologies with different data structures, with different protective systems around there to get that out. On the other hand, if you're Michael Schumacher and you're lying in a Swiss clinic, it only took one person to go and take a picture of his paper-based files and to share those on the internet. So which one of those is actually more secure, do you think? At a societal level, I think the stuff that you were talking about was actually more about, I think, a very different subject, which is actually about the manipulation of narratives, which is out there. It's less about, when they're talking about election interference at the moment, it's actually quite difficult now for them to actually, or let's put it this way, it is easier for external forces to manipulate public opinion through social media than it is for them to hack into the e-voting systems and actually manipulate those. So that's actually where the challenge is. It's rather a competition of narratives and actually owning the narrative within the country rather than worrying about whether the data is secure. But yes, the data has to be hellishly secure, which is why if you do build up a digital society, you do need to make sure that those protections are in place. But you do need to make sure also that you've made the investment into managing the narrative in society as well. Because this is the big challenge that we have in Eastern Europe, actually throughout Europe as well, is that for many, many years, this has been going on within our systems, with this constant attempts to disrupt the societies by trying to feed a different narrative, trying to alienate and divide people within the societies. So there's a lot of experience in fighting back there. And actually, I believe that I've been told anyway, that the country that's best at doing this now, the most expert country, is Ukraine. Because they're the ones who have actually got the most, I guess, near and present danger. It's a critical thing for them to try and keep their society together when there's this lengthy, sustained, really heavy attack, which is largely done at that narrative level. Yeah, so invest in your cybersecurity, but also invest in managing that narrative, yeah. Thank you. Hi.
Hi, good evening. I'm Kalila Reynolds, Nationwide News Network in Jamaica. What kind of biometric data is collected under Estonia's registration program? I know you said it's mandatory. And was there any legal resistance to that in the beginning when people were considering perhaps privacy issues? I see some people here chuckling because in Jamaica, the Supreme Court recently ruled that it's unconstitutional to collect that biometric data in a mandatory way. And so now the government has to come back very quickly with a new plan that's probably not mandatory and no biometrics. So can it work without it being mandatory and without collecting biometrics? And back to the first question, what kind of biometric data is collected in Estonia?
Okay, for sure, thank you. So I can talk about when I got my residence card. All they actually take, so biometric data, I guess Estonia is probably a little bit behind on this one. They just took a photo. And that was it. There were no sort of fingerprints, iris scans, or anything like this going on. So we haven't confronted that issue there yet. My guess is that what's going to have to be done is, again, California's jumped out here very quickly on this one. And actually one of the big challenges in India with the Aadhaar program, because it was based on thumbprints, is that all of a sudden there was a raging trade in prosthetic thumbs. So these systems aren't actually as secure as you might think using biometrics anyway. But I think what they're going to have to do is come up with sort of like a tiered system that, okay, if you want access to X stuff online, we're going to need X level of verification and confidence that this really, really is you. If you don't want to give that information, that's okay, but we're going to have to find another way to actually verify you on the day. So you might have to come into the office or something like this. Like pin system. Yes, and this is what's working in Estonia at the moment, but it's never an endpoint. There's going to be somebody who, at some point, will break that, and Estonia will need to have moved on from that already well before that happens. And it's not going to happen I shouldn't actually tempt fate here, but it's very unlikely that's going to happen in the near future, but we'll have to find new systems to put in place before it can happen, just because of the rise of computing power. It makes it so much easier before long to crack these really heavy levels of encryption. So we're going to have to find a new way. And whether that's biometrics or not, I don't know. But I think that there is this competition all around the world now between knowing who you are, knowing who's behind the device, and actually protecting that privacy. There's actually, no, I'll take too long, but there's actually a solution in Estonia that's working out a way to actually provide sort of zero knowledge of the data itself or the information that proves who you are, just to tell somebody that you really are, but give the people confidence that you are who you say you are. So without actually sharing that information, it's just sort of a yes-no solution. But it's a heavier tech and it's not ready yet.
All right, just in case you have a burning question after Nigel, you can meet in the lobby and ask the question. So we're going to have 3 more questions. The young lady, the gentleman over there, and Nigel will be the final question. If you have another question, you can meet with him privately outside.
Good evening.
Hi.
My name is Sheila Hernandez, and I attend Bishop Anstiegels High School East. And I was wondering, on the topic of pursuing a digital future, what advice would you have for us as students or the literal future generation on, or with regards to different areas or fields we should venture into in order to make a significant impact on achieving this digital future?
Okay, good question. Do you know, maybe study politics. Because the most important thing, actually, that you guys need to do, actually, I tell my daughter this as well, the most important thing that you guys need to do is to actually make sure that these guys listen to you now. Because you're right, this is your future that's being built here. And actually, you understand the opportunities far better than any of us in the room, because you're native to this space. Most of us have actually learnt it as it sort of came into our worlds. But otherwise, and again, going back to your question about the sort of the future of the working environment, more and more, I think, it's about being creative, being imaginative, being able to build new things out of the stuff that comes along, because the technology is going to keep changing at a faster and faster pace. So don't learn the technology that's here now, but actually learn how to learn the new stuff as it comes in, and start playing with lots of different ideas about how you can do it with it, what you can do with it. So I guess you have to do your reading, writing, arithmetic, all that sort of stuff. That's still sort of a baseline, but focus more on the creative spaces and actually just experimenting and doing stuff. I think that would be the biggest advice. Take the startup approach to life and just experiment, fail, and have a great time in the process.
Hi, Des O'Leary from Department of Finance in another small country, Ireland. You've made one of the fundamental building blocks of the system is trust.
Yes.
And we had a rather unfortunate experience 20 years ago with electronic voting, in which you could essentially prove that a person had voted, but you couldn't prove afterwards that what they had actually voted, because there wasn't a paper trail. I was just wondering, what protections are in the system within the recent European elections to make sure that not only the person voted, but that their vote was recorded as exactly what they had said, and that they were entitled to vote. And we're now, having taken 3 weeks to fill one European seat, we're thinking about electronic voting again, so we might be back to you. Last point on trust, insurance. When a person is registered, and if they have a medical problem, it may turn out that they have a predisposition to some disease. There are many cases of where insurance companies have said, you may or may not develop that disease, but we're not going to give you insurance on the basis that the risk is there. What level of protection is there for the citizen in situations like that within Estonia?
Okay, for sure. Thank you. So actually, just to your point about the e-voting and coming back to Estonia, I believe the software is, again, open sourced, so you can just pull it down and use it. Actually, it's a funny one. So in Estonia, you can vote as many times as you like in an election. So you can... it's brilliant, isn't it? But it only counts once. So whatever your last vote was, that is the one that is counted. So what this does is it gives a little bit of confidence that, okay, so I'm sitting at home voting. There's a strong chance, there is an opportunity for somebody to compel me to vote a certain way by standing over me with a gun against my head. Are they going to stand with me right up until the voting closes? Actually, the e-voting in Estonia as well, it generally closes a few days before the actual physical voting is opened up. So you get 2-3 days where you can then, having put in your 64 different votes as you're sort of changing your mind all the time. You can have a final change of mind and run down to the polling station and put in your vote there, and that is your final vote. There's a story actually about a woman who did that, who actually voted 60-odd times. And do you know what? The police actually just wandered around to her house just to make sure that everything was okay. There was and it was. She was just playing around and just seeing what was going on there. So it is traceable. I don't know technically how they're doing it. We can certainly find that out, but it is traceable to make sure that there's a match between a person they've voted and who they've voted for. There must also be a way then to make sure that whilst the system knows who that person has voted for, that you don't know who she's voted for in there. When it comes to insurance, I think Estonia is in the same place as most of the world and trying to nut this one out as to how that information can be shared without creating a bias against these people. The only thing that's there at the moment is that the individual controls their data. So that data only gets shared with the insurance agency if they request that it be done so. And I believe at the moment that the insurance agency cannot compel them to do so. The insurance agency can't say, okay, well, we can insure you, but only if we see your data first. They're not allowed to do that. Mm-hmm. But again, this is, I think actually what's going to happen there is that's going to be more of an EU-wide thing. A decision is going to be taken, and then Estonia will be brought into this one. They haven't solved everything yet, almost. We're getting there.
So I have two questions for you. Correspondent banking and moving money, even within the Caribbean, is a big problem. Huge, huge problem. Very expensive, takes a long time. Where is Estonia with respect to digitization of its currency? So that's the first question.
Okay.
The second one has to do with data privacy, but data privacy from a government perspective. Mm-hmm. So we know today that Facebook and Google and Amazon and Apple have a lot of our data. They know what we do. We are leaving breadcrumbs all over the place for them to follow. Combine that with this, and then you give the government the ability to profile us and do all sorts of not nice things if they don't like what we are doing. So the question there is, what kind of legislative legal framework is Estonia putting in place, if it has or it has not, to protect the citizen from the government? Thank you.
Sure. Actually, a very pertinent question. Thank you. Just going back to digitalizing the currency, in the world these days, I'm not sure about the situation here, but most of the transactions are digital. There's very little that actually happens on paper these days. Even within Estonia is also part of the Eurozone, so everything just sort of flows very nicely around that. Estonia is also the home, I don't know if you guys have heard of a company called Transferwise. So these guys make it very simple to transfer different currencies around the world without getting banks involved. Actually what they did, and this is great advice for anybody wanting to do a startup, they actually took stuff, they were brought out as being quite a revolutionary company in making it so much cheaper for people to transfer currencies around the world and pulling the banks out of the middle. Actually, so many Forex platforms were already doing that. But to be blunt, their user experience really sucked. Transferwise sorted out the user experience. So it's a single click most of the time to move it around, and the currency just flies. Actually, they're also one of the companies who talks most about borderless society, about tearing down these sort of barriers between the different countries. When it comes to governments using social media data and the likes, that's an interesting one. So in Estonia, again, by law, the government has to expose all the data they have about you. Now, we know that laws are one thing and what actually happens can be slightly different. So I think the only way there is to maintain a very vigilant civil society to protect against that. But the laws are certainly in place that the government must expose what data they have about us. And actually this is, I guess it's EU-wide now under GDPR, the General Data Protection Regulation, that if any citizen wants their information from the government, it applies the same way as if they go to a business. They have to provide this information. I'm not sure, though, with governments you can actually tell them to give the information back and delete it from their systems, though, which you can do with businesses. Yeah. But thank you. Great questions. you very much. Shall I get out of the way?
Ladies and gentlemen, one more time for Mr. Calum Cameron. And of course, we are in Trinidad and Tobago, and it's traditional that if you visit, you can't just leave just so. We have to give you a little something while you're going. So we have some presentations tonight to be made by the Chairman of the Board of Directors, the Honorable Camille Robinson Regis. Our first presentation will be to a member of the Demas family. We have a presentation to the President of the Caribbean Development Bank, Dr. Warren Smith. Vice President, Corporate Services and Bank Secretary, Ms. Yvette Levon-Steele. Vice President Operations, Ms. Monica LeBennett. And last but not least, our speaker for tonight, Mr. Calum Cameron. Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. And now to present what they call on the program the vote of thanks, we have the Chief Information Officer of the Caribbean Development Bank, Mr. Julio Lima.
Chair, governors, president, all vice presidents, ladies and gentlemen, all protocols observed. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening. I'm always excited to talk about digital transformation and its possibilities. I wish I had more time, about an hour to talk about that, but I'm just here to do the closing. So tonight, as I listened to Calum speak about his experience of Estonia, that excitement continued, and it's just providing me more energy to continue to do the job that I have to do with CDB. But I was also reminded that technology as such is not the heart of a digital transformation. Indeed, I would like to join Calum in emphasizing the importance of creating the right culture for change. Change takes time, it's hard. And nowadays, it looks like technology evolves faster than we can actually assimilate. So we have to be ready to adapt and evolve alongside technology. This is just a fact. For this reason, the path towards digital transformation should have a strong vision, a clear mission, an integrated roadmap, so that all citizens, governments, the private sector know where they're heading into the future. As Carlos said, we need to think about integration, the knowledge sharing, process improvements, automation, privacy, human rights, among many other things. And if you haven't noticed yet, most of these things have a common denominator: us, people. Calum, right there because of the light, I would like to thank you for sharing your remarkable experience in Estonia. Thank you for inspiring us and for reminding us that being small does not have to be a constraint. Like Estonia, we in the Caribbean can achieve great things, particularly if we apply digital innovations to help improve our lives and productivity. Your presentation tonight also highlighted the tremendous potential that digital identification holds for our societies. It clearly was the basic for the whole spin-off in Estonia. So despite the recent hiccup with the rollout of a national digital identification system in one of our board member countries, you remind us that we should persevere, since a well-designed system can be secure, can protect our privacy, and most importantly, improve the quality of life of our people and enhance productivity of our economies. This year, like Monica said in the beginning, the theme of CDB Board of Governors meeting is transformation. And the theme reflects a strong desire to see our region become more resilient. And guess what? Digitalization can really help us to be way, way more resilient. Calum, you told us that because of digitalization removes the constraints of physical boundaries, and the future will be stating competes to provide service to people anywhere in the world. You also remind us that it's important to constantly keep eyes on our future and how we need to compete internationally. Again, when we move towards the path towards digitalization, we can compete effectively in the current and the future global economy. So, Calum, based on what you said and the discussions we had last night, I believe that we must establish a long-term, inclusive, and I would say a tech word here, iterative transformation plan. And I say iterative because we need to be agile, and we need to evolve with our surroundings. The world is not stopping. So it's important to continuously review and revise that plan as we advance with a digital agenda. I wish there was a single recipe for becoming a digital society. We can definitely follow the path of Estonia, but we have to go along the way. It's not going to be the same thing. And it took several years for Estonia to get it right and achieve the maturity as a digital nation. But importantly, Estonia had the people, the government on board, and a very strong vision. And like you said, you have to set that vision. So before we get carried away and we start talking about blockchain, I heard blockchain, artificial intelligence, and which are, by the way, all great things, shouldn't we ask ourselves, do we have the things that we described earlier? Do we have the people, the government, the right culture for change, and that strong vision? So I leave this out for reflection as I finish here. Let's transform the Caribbean together so we can achieve much, much more. I know and I strongly believe that we can do so much more with digital transformation. So on behalf of the Board of Governors, the Board of Directors, the President, and management of the Caribbean Development Bank, let me express our sincere thanks to you, our audience, here in Trinidad and online, our host, the people of Trinidad and Tobago. Thank you and have a pleasant evening.
Ladies and gentlemen, before I let you out, we have to, of course, say a special thank you to our host this evening, the Central Bank of Trinidad and Tobago. And we would like to present the governor with a special token. We didn't forget you at all. So. And the central bank has been a very good host. The total bill for everything that they've provided tonight, they showed it to me, and then they tore it up. Thank you very much, Central Bank. And now we've come to the end of the formal part of the presentation, but of course it's not over yet because there's more to come in the foyer outside. Before we leave, we're going to have a photo opportunity. Mr. Photographer, please come by. And the esteemed guests, along with our speaker. Can you join me on stage, please, for a photo? The front row. Everyone is looking at me a little. Let me. Just go a little bit center.
So what's the future then? Yeah? Have you got ideas yet? Yeah. No, I just told you that's all coming. What's coming next is interesting about you.
Do you want me to be? No. I mean, the photographer coming. You just get first thing. And the police didn't knock on my door.
actually a lot of, you say nobody lives near it? No. There's actually a lot of space to build that.
Flats at the moment. Flats at the moment, yeah, that's what it is. Goes with gravity. So on one spin, back here. Thursday, I live on Thursday. We're giving the volcano the rest. So we're in a pretty safe place. The only danger out there is ash, which is a mess.
Not earthquakes or anything?
Very only could be identified by the equipment from the MBO.
Oh, okay. So no problems there. Okay.
But it's about millions of tons of sand, fertile lands, and geothermal power and huge tractor. I mean, fantastic. You don't have to paint it.
It's actually a really good point about the geothermal. Can you export? Do you export?
No. We have to do where you can access a large amount that you need, too close to go. So we only have enough to go beyond our use.
Okay.
And they think they can multiply it. There's some technical ways of doing that. Yeah. But with the combination, we can.
And the great thing is technology is always on the plan. So it won't be long before they work away.
Yes. We've lost 2/3 of our population, but they all qualified and trained in areas that it would never be.
Ah, okay.
So bring back young people.
So it's not as if you lost them to an eruption or something. So, okay.
So, there's a plus. I can see it now. I couldn't see it when we were going through it, but now you're seeing it all fit together.
For sure. I don't know whether Plus is putting a positive spin on it because these are quite tragic things. I mean, I'm pretty sure if you asked Estonians back in the 1930s or the start of the 19th, I guess the 19th.